hit the button a couple minutes early just to make sure that everything starts on time. Let's see. Okay, I think it's working. All right, so let me check one other thing here. Okay, looks like we're good. My little chime on my clock going off tells me that it's just about noon. If you know me, you know that I'm always early, so I just can't help it. But it looks like all the systems are working here, so and get to it. So we are talking about chapter 2 of What Happened to You, the book by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. This one, it took me a little bit. I didn't have, I guess, I don't know, an instant kind of reaction to it that I had with chapter 1. It took a little bit of time to sort of sit with the information and get a response out of me. But, of course, I have all my notes, so obviously I've got something to say. So anyway, just right out of the gate, with Oprah's kind of commentary introduction to this chapter, she's talking about the heart, and her question, how much do you think about your heart? It's like, unless you've had an issue with it, you probably rarely think about it. And as she delved into why she kind of became aware of what her heart does for me, it kind of made me laugh, because I too am going through that change that happens in your 40s. So anyway, it kind of made me chuckle a little bit that the sort of the heart palpitations and the awareness of really how much goes on inside your body just kind of struck with me. But anyway, one of the things that she said was that she realized that her body is always talking to her, and I don't think we really take the time to think about it that way, that our body is always communicating. We're just kind of reacting to everything in the outside, and not taking time to feel what's going on the inside. And that can kind of lead to a lot of the problems that we experience, certainly emotionally, and then even in spilling out into our relationships. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of get to just off the top was that when Dr. Perry gets into it, he uses the term, or the terms, regulation and balance. And I like that. I like that approach in terms of figuring out, how our bodies and our minds. Me personally, and this word is all over the place these days, but self-care, I don't know why, I don't really like that phrase, that term, self-care. It always makes me feel that what I'm doing is self-indulgent, like it's some sort of, I don't know, pampering that I'm doing for myself, instead of just the necessary maintenance that I need to do for my body and mind. So instead of thinking of it as like a luxury to do the self-care, and you see all over social media, get a massage or blah for self-care, but it's more than that, and it's not just a one-off. I think with the way that Dr. Perry uses the terms regulate and balance, it makes me feel like it's non-negotiable, that I need to do every day to maintain my physical and mental health. Because if you don't keep tabs on it every day, I think that's where things can get off track. So one quick side note before we really get it. On page 47, Dr. Perry starts talking about rhythm. And I think that, there even more discussion about rhythm in general in this book, but he touches on it briefly about finding things that like are rhythmic activity, soothing. They talk about it in terms of like, rocking a baby when a baby's upset. You can find whatever rhythm works to help calm the baby, but also mentioning like walking, and that kind of got me to think. I have a friend that suffers from anxiety, and she would tell me that she would need to do really vigorous, intense exercise to help maintain kind of that balance, keeping her anxiety in check. And I thought, well, that makes sense because you're working hard and you're getting the endorphins and making your body feel better. But I also, from this little bit here about rhythm, I wonder if just like the rhythmic pounding of her feet on the road or treadmill, wherever she was able to run that day, like, is that part of the soothing bit too? For me, music is a huge part of my life. Listening to, playing, I've been playing piano since I was 6, and finding joy in that, both listening to music as well. And I always thought, well, it's soothing to me because my mind is engaged elsewhere instead of thinking about all the things going on or being consumed with other stuff. My mind is kind of, transported to a different place because I'm either engaged in playing or listening to. And, like it's taking me out of my head. But now, thinking about this even more with the rhythm aspect, it's like, the play, the methodical movements of my hand, and then of course listening to music, the repetitive beats or rhythm to whatever song it happens to be. I wonder if that's a bit of what gets into the soothing, calming nature of rhythm. And then of course, when they mention about, I have a place that I love to go on the Oregon coast, and I always just thought that it was because I loved, the raw beauty of nature and this particular place. But it's like, I can even feel it now when I take myself back there. Like the moment I get out of the car, I'm instantly calm and soothed. And I think not only because I'm in a beautiful place that I love, but you step out of the car, the ocean, and you're instantly hit with that rhythmic sound of the waves. And it's like, okay, there could be something to this. And curious to know, as you read this chapter, what for you thinking about, well, gosh, when I'm out hiking or walking or doing, anything that has some sort of rhythm to it, what else is that giving you? So just kind of interesting, I thought. I do really like learning about the science behind all of this. Feels, I don't know, I feel like I'm getting smart every time I read it. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into kind of the major part of this. On page 48, they really start to talk about balance, and they use that term a lot throughout this chapter about balance and regulation. So what they mention and what we learned even from the last chapter, as Oprah said, is if you want to understand the oak, you've got to the acorn. So all of this balance and regulation is something that we are taught and we learn at a very young age. And getting into that, that any stress that we experience takes us out of balance. And I thought it was kind of nice too that they do say that stress doesn't necessarily have to mean something, that anything that influences you or comes at you in life, can be called a stressor, and it's just the matter of how you react, handle, and then kind of get back to your baseline. So I thought that was a nice perspective, that stress isn't always, it shouldn't always have a negative connotation. And learning that balance is at the core of our health, not physical, but mental and emotional. So, one of the other things that he gets into, at least he mentions it on page 50, but he's got a bunch of figures, in the book, this tree of regulation. I don't know about you, but when I was reading it, you could actually have a whole entire chapter on this chart, on all the other charts. So one of the things that I found a little hard, was trying to understand some of the information, but Oprah, of course, as she usually does, sums it up beautifully with regulation, relationship, and reward. So, that being attended to in a positive and responsive and predictable way, a child can form a positive view that people are safe, predictable, and caring. And that, that definitely is true. It made me think of an experience that my daughter had last year at school. She was going through or experiencing a bit of bullying at school, and what this one bully in particular did was call her stupid. And that upset her, of course, but the hardest part of it all was actually for her to try to understand why, if it wasn't true, that they would say it. So essentially, why would someone lie and tell you something that isn't true? Because she didn't have any experience up until that point with people lying to her. And when reading this, specifically on page 50, where Perry says that when the three systems, that regulation, relationship, and reward, begin to wire together, they create foundational memories. And the reason that we feel regulated and rewarded when we get signals of acceptance or warmth from another person. And it can, be the thing that keeps people together. But on the side of that, when you experience something that doesn't mesh, you can't quite, understand why, first off, that's happening, and then what do you do about it? So, with my daughter, when we were talking about it, and I would ask, well, do you think you're stupid? And she would hesitate, and she would then reply with, well, if it's not true, why would they say that? Again, because she didn't have that experience. I just thought it was kind of interesting as well. Skipping ahead, on page 55, they get to scenarios where a child is not raised in a supportive and positive environment, and how that kind of unpredictable reaction, unpredictable patterns can then force the child into develop these kind of prolonged periods of dysregulation. And I think, for most people, the scenario, with a baby being hungry and cold and not being attended to right away, you can kind of understand how that would cause stress and trauma for that child. And I'll have to apologize. I'm a little, disjointed, a little distracted today, because just about 10 minutes before I started this, my daughter lost a tooth and swallowed it. So we were in a bit of an emotional state ourselves here. So trying to calm down and for me to be able to do this was a challenge. Yes, so apologies in advance. This is not as fluid as you would like, but We do our best, don't we? All right. So, and this is what I mean. I kind of skipped around in this chapter a bit too because I don't know. I felt like almost each little section could have been its own chapter. That there's more explanation for some of it to get into it more. But going up ahead on page 58, I really liked what he said, what Dr. Perry said, that we elicit from the world what we project, but what you project is based upon what happened to you as a child. And I like that because it definitely resonated with me because as a child, my home life wasn't where I would have any unpredictability. It was, loving and supportive, but school was where I encountered that because of the bullying. I didn't know, from one day to the next, is today going to be a fine, normal, happy day, or is today a day, that someone decides that they're going to go ahead and pick on me or tease me. So what I started to do, it's like when I would leave the house, you put on this armor. You start developing kind of the ability to put on your protective uniform and get out there, because that would then at least help me feel like if I'm tough on the outside, nothing that anybody will say to me will get through. So I was projecting that, putting out that kind of barrier, that space of I'm not letting anybody in. But as I got older, that pattern was being, solidified. That just became my mode of operation. I would get, put on my armor as soon as I would walk out the door or go anywhere new. And it makes it harder and harder then for me to form close emotional bonds. That's why people would tell me all the time, I'm very selfish. It's like, well, at the time I didn't really feel that. It's like, well, I'm a perfectly nice person, but I wasn't putting out the vibe of, hey, I want to get to know you, come over here, let's talk. And that's because I'm so used to putting on that, coat of armor, and the worst. I'm ready for someone to come at me with something negative. I'm not willing to even entertain the possibility that they will be coming, from a place of genuine interest and wanting to get to know me, and not just talk about or tease or make fun of my birth defect. So, yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting as well, and wondering what some of you that read the chapter 2 think about that whole concept of, you get back what you give. You're putting out this standoffish attitude. Well, you're not a lot of people that are going to come back and work hard at trying to get to know you. It's kind of that, reciprocal. You get what you give. And I think I might be having some slow internet issues as well, but again, we're just going to do our best here today. All right. Page 59. Near the bottom, he says that finding balance can be an exhausting challenge for anyone with trauma-altered stress response systems. The search to avoid the pain of distress can lead to extreme, ultimately destructive methods of regulation. I mean, 100%, right? I mean, when we're feeling really bad, we're reaching for the nearest thing that's going to give us any kind of relief. And as they go into, Oprah starts talking about a conversation she had with Russell Brand, and I thought it was really interesting. I don't know, too much about him. I've seen a couple of his movies, but I didn't know anything about his struggles with addiction. And but it made a lot of sense. When you're uncomfortable on the inside, you're searching out ways to soothe that, to relieve that, and most of the time, the quickest thing is not the best thing. You know, drugs, alcohol, sex, all of that can really lead you down a wrong path, at least in terms of learning how to figure it out. It definitely her sharing of her bit about Russell Brand brought up for me, the fact that we're never taught this, technique and strategy as kids. We're not taught, you should have a clear emotional intelligence education, because isn't that where the root of a lot of our problems comes from? My parents did their best with helping me, and they did a fine job, but to actually have like a lot of this kind of science-based, there's a reason that this is happening. Here's what you can do to, try to mitigate, handle, deal with all the things that are going to come at you. Man, I mean, wouldn't we be quite a different place, society-wise, if that was viewed as important. So there's my soapbox moment for today. Let's see, on page 61, I was happy too that they brought this up. Dr. Perry says, remember what we said about the pattern of stress activation. Even in the absence of major events, unpredictable stress and the lack of control that goes with it are enough to make our stress response systems sensitized, meaning overactive and overly reactive, creating that internal storm. And I like that they brought that up because, sometimes when we think about personal trauma, we think, huge things. But trauma is experienced differently by everybody. Some people may think that the teasing I endured isn't that big of a deal. I wasn't ever physically attacked, thank God. But it's just kind of a spectrum, right? And it all has to do with the person experiencing it. We don't have to think what they experienced, we don't need to belittle or devalue what they went through, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That we all have things that have impacted us negatively. And learning how to process it and handle it is key. He gets then to those other little charts, and again, I feel like there could be a whole chapter devoted to that. And I think we've heard it before, filling your bucket. If you've got kids in school, at least my daughter's age and first grade, they talk about that, is your bucket full today, that kind of thing. But what does that mean? And again, I don't, we just don't have education on it, that it's not some big one-time gigantic thing that's going to keep your bucket full forever. As he mentions on page, 64, that it's a daily thing that we have to do. We have to check in with ourselves every day. And when we don't, when we let that, our resources and deplete to the point of, below that minimum line they talk about, that's when we can and reach for the thing or engage in the activity that really can be harmful. It may feel good in the moment, but long term, that's not going to be what we need to do. There are small things that you can do each day to keep that, that bucket above the level line. Kind of to the end of this, they get into kind of, I guess, they're summing up their core idea that one way to keep that bucket full and what they've learned, and I think we know it too, is human connection. That really provides positive human connection, I should say, um, that provides that type of fulfillment really looking for. So my takeaways from this chapter, and again, I apologize for being a bit kind of all over the place today. My takeaway is that, the regulation of stressors in our life is kind of the most important work that we can do, and it's a skill that you have to learn. You're not born with knowing how to do this. And I think as you learn the skills, it gives you, um, a sense of having more control in regards to your emotional responses to situations. Because now, like for me, I know when I go into a new situation where I don't know anybody, event at my husband's work, or having to speak to somebody at my daughter's school, anything like that, like I can already tell my body is like rigid. It's hard. It's not relaxed and kind of expecting the good to come. From all my experience younger, I'm prepared for battle and to not let anything in. Projecting that. I got to now, realize that that's what I'm doing. Take a deep breath. Expect the good, and go into it with more of a, open mind and open heart. The other part that I thought was interesting from this chapter was, talking about learning what naturally soothes you, and not reaching for something outside, drugs, alcohol, sex that is, with unsafe partners, or, scenarios that are not what you really want to be doing, but looking for that quick fix. Because as they say, even in here, that the pleasure that you get from it is fleeting. That's why, you can't eat one potato chip. The flavor dissipates quickly. So figuring out what that is for you, what is it that makes you feel better? So a challenge, I think, for me and for you this week, after reading this chapter, is let's make a list of the things that make us feel joy, that naturally soothe us. Write it down and put it up, on your fridge, or have it in your phone if that works for you, so that when you start to feel these, uneasiness, unsettled, like you're out of control, or you have no control over what's going on, you come back to that list and be like, okay, I know what makes me feel better is I'm going to sit down and play this prelude that I really like. It's calming, makes me feel better, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. The other thing I thought, and we mentioned it last week too, when they talked about, connection is vitally important to our emotional health. Well, I think a lot of us learned that in 2020. But the challenge then is, how do we do that? How do we formulate connections with others, not only in the midst of a global pandemic, but also as adults? I think it's hard, to make friends as adults. So I came up with a list of a couple of things, at least right now, social media, online communities. Facebook has probably a group about anything you're looking for, but the key is to find groups that are positive. And once you join a group, you can kind of see what the action is like, what the feed is like, and if it's negative and not making you feel good, leave the group. So you've got online communities that way. As we start kind of re-emerging from our lockdowns, if if you're religious, maybe you'll be going back to church. Maybe there'll be some sort of church group or religious group that you want to become a part of. Book clubs, like this one, or local bookstores. I know Barnes and Noble does them too. But the key is that it all requires effort on, you know, yours and my part. Nobody's going to do it for us. Like they said, you get what you give. If you want to engage with people, you've got to put yourself out there to do that. You have to ask for what you want. Anybody that's in a long-term relationship knows that's true. No matter how much we want people to read our minds and just give us what it is that we need and want, that's not the case. If you want something different for your life, then you have to work for it and make it happen. There's your tough talk for the day. But the key, you know, I part of that too is being okay with being that vulnerable. You've got to put yourself out there, and when you do that, there's always a risk of hurt or, you know, vulnerability that way. But you've got to, you know, if you really want something to change, that's what you need to do. You need to empower yourself with education. Learn what works for you, because what works for me won't work for you, and vice versa. Make your list, and then, you know, just keep going, keep figuring it out. And I think that's all I have. I hope that the internet worked all right, but this will be uploaded on the YouTube channel, Dragonfly Paradigm. You can subscribe to that. Last week's is up. There's also some playlists as well if you're into listening to some music. And I think that's it. So next week, hopefully a little bit smoother. Hopefully my daughter will not lose another tooth that she swallows 10 minutes before the video. And see you next week for Chapter 3.